it started to level off again. Now, when you bring in and you do a deal, there may be a Hawthorne effect that happens in a variety of ways, or something analogous to a Hawthorne effect. New technology may increase job satisfaction. It may increase employee retention. One reason universities do technology transfer is because they want to encourage the faculty to remain at the university. There's another reason they do it as well. There's mission relevance. The mission of a university is to create and disseminate knowledge. So by transferring the technology out, you're helping to meet the mission of the university. These are non-monetary impacts, although they're to some extent convertible. It costs us money to train new workers. On the flip side, if faculty don't leave and they're tenured, we can't replace them with younger people who are cheaper. So, but it's harder to sort of calculate some of these non-monetary impacts. At the far end of the scale, so we have a scale, easy to convert, harder to convert. At the far end, there's things like life. I'm a survivor of a bone marrow transplant. I had my bone marrow transplant in 1989. I can calculate the cost of the bone marrow transplant. I can go to actuarial tables or look at my income and do a discounted cash flow and see what my value is to the economy and put a number on that. But none of that really comes up to what my value is to my wife, my children, or my cat down. Sorry, Penny. Or my cat down here. For them, it's not really a monetary issue. So on that far side, we have non-monetary payoffs that are very hard to convert into money. So now we end up with this multi-dimensional payoff issue, and we want a rational way to include it in our payoff calculation. Here's my advice. First, you calculate the cash payoffs. Then you convert what you can convert into cash payoffs that are easily converted. Basically, as we saw a while back, we can convert a utility into a value by asking, is there a bundle of goods and services that will create the same amount of satisfaction or happiness as this item that I'm looking at now, or this experience I'm looking at now? If that's the case, I can value that bundle of goods and services, and thus I can add that to the payoffs. And finally, when I get done moving everything over that I can move over, I'm left with this residual category. Now I can do preference scales. I can say this is more important than this is more important than this. These are like analytical, hierarchical procedure or other ways of doing trade-offs. I can't necessarily say how much more important they are, but I can say it's more or less. And essentially what I suggest is this. Once you calculate all the cash values, you take a look at the options for the strategies that you have and for the choices you have for the payoffs, and rank order them in terms of their non-monetary values, and you use that to adjust the payoffs. Well, I can hear people coming up the stairs, so I'll end here and we'll start again in a little while. We've talked a lot about risk in the context of discounted cash flow. There we've talked about market risk, technical risk, and firm-specific risk. Excuse me. And we'll come back to that in the next session. In this session, I want to talk about another kind of risk. When we try to figure out the payoffs, as we've seen before, payoffs are based upon a set of assumptions. Who's going to be the end user? What are the end user's needs? How much of this they're going to buy? What kinds of externalities are going to occur that we can convert into cash for the payoffs, and so on. Now, so far we've dealt with this as if that's a trivial problem, but it's not by any means. And so you have to worry about the risk that you're going to make the wrong assumptions. One way to control for that risk is to use a tree-like structure, a branching structure, and at the nodes there's different paths that come out. Well, I should do it this way better to show you. At the nodes there's different paths that come out, and there are probabilities that one path versus the other path will occur. How do you figure out what the probabilities are? That then becomes the question. Well, the simple answer for that is good market research. What you have to do is look at the assumptions you're making, let's say I'm making an assumption about how big the market is going to be for vaccines, and then I try to look at the market forces that can skew buying behavior one way or the other, or the forces that will skew the assumption I'm making away from what I think it is. And it's important when we talk about forces to think about these like forces. We know about Newtonian forces. Newton's sitting under the apple tree and boink, the apple comes down and knocks him on the head. That's a force. You feel the impact. Forces are vectors. They go in a certain direction with a certain strength or a direction and a magnitude. Well, similarly, our assumptions are based upon a kind of force field, almost like a gravitational force field. It's like one of those situations, you won't be able to see me that well, you'll just see my body here, but it's like I'm shooting off towards Mars and I shoot towards the moon, and I go to the moon and I whip around the moon and I go back the other way, and that gives me the gravitational pull to shoot my satellite off to Mars. Well, you have to play the force fields. Now, how do you determine where the force fields are that are going to affect the assumptions you're making? Two ways you do it. You go out and you collect hard data, and then you talk to experts about the data you've collected and get their read on it. When you collect your data, make your own assumptions about it. Figure out the probabilities of each branch. There may be more than two branches. Figure out the probabilities of the branches yourself. Then run the probabilities by experts and ask them what they think. Why do we do it that way? Well, work by Armstrong at the Wharton School found out that when we're going to look at forecasts for the mid and the long range, informed lay people actually make better forecasts than experts do, because one reason they're an expert is they have their real deep knowledge of the present, and that sort of blinds them or binds them when they go to look outside that box. But what you do is you take your set of assumptions, you average it with the experts' assumptions. There's all sorts of methods like focus groups or Delphi panels you can use to refine this. But basically, you're going to throw your dart, you're going to define your assumptions about the past, the probabilities of those past. Those probabilities allow you to calculate a discounted cash flow that takes into account various options happening. If you want to get fancier, you can begin to look at real option theory for what happens at the nodes if there's decisions that are being made at those nodes. This is a book on real options by Tom Copeland. I highly recommend it. I think Copeland provides a good introduction to the subject together with a useful framework for actually doing something with it. Well, we've talked about how we deal with assumptions that underlie our discounting and assumptions that underlie our calculations that go into the payoffs. When we come back, we'll talk about the other aspect of risk, which is the specific risks that go into discounting the cash flow.